Last week, earlier this week, I called up Gretchen, my daughter, to ask her, what was the last thing we talked about last spring? And we could not remember. Hopefully, you're going to see some new stuff today. A lot of it I'm going to do is review of what we've been doing in this book of Genesis, and then we're going to get into what I think may be new material. But if it is one that I showed before, that's all right. I've added some more stuff to it. Let's take a look at the first slide. This is a division of Genesis. It's a slide I made up myself. In this slide, I try to show something I find very fascinating. That is that this book of Genesis is unique. The Bible is unique to begin with, but the book of Genesis is unique in the Bible, and that it covers so much interesting material. Actually, you find out if you go to the Genesis, you will find it's divided into two parts, equal or unequal. It depends on how you look at it. The first part is from the first of Genesis up to chapter 11, 25. After 25, you start to get into what I would consider to be some of the Bible history. Then from 12 through 50, we have a continuum. We have a total here of what? 400 years. What is it? Yeah, 600 years. A lot happens in that 600 years. In this one, we have from zero, this is from 1800 BC back to, I think it's either 14 or 17 billion years ago. Maybe off by 500 or 600 million years. Because, yeah, somehow or another, this is not the right slide. Actually, you find that the book of Genesis starts out by talking about the cosmos. It talks about in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it goes right to the earth. And then it goes to life. And then what I have in this slide is an indication that we also have in those first 11 chapters, some things about some of the people. Some familiar stories again. Most people are quite familiar with Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. Shem, Ham, and Japheth are the sons of Noah, Tower of Babel. Enoch and the Nephilim are two other things that we might talk about another time. On the other hand, when we get to this section here, where we look at the patriarchs, we have a lot of very good Bible stories. Now, the significance of being Bible stories I indicated a couple of weeks ago, and that is that from those Bible stories we very often can, with the help of what we know from archaeology and secular history, see a close relationship from what the events that are taking place in those Bible stories and the things that actually had occurred at one time. Let's take a look at this next slide. This shows all the way from Adam. I just want to go through this very quickly. The three sons of Adam that we know are Cain, Abel, and Seth. Of course, Abel is dead. Cain had to leave. Seth is the ancestor of Noah. From Noah, we get the three sons that I've mentioned before, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Shem is the one that leads to Terah. Each one of these names in between here could be many, many different generations. But what we can conclude is that Terah is a descendant of Shem. That makes him a Semite. Now, go a little bit further. If we take a look at the story of Abraham, we really have to start out by looking at Terah, who was Abraham's father. We find out in chapter 11 of Genesis that Terah was the one that made the decision to leave the Ur of the Chaldees, or to leave Mesopotamia, and move. Well, he wanted to move to Canaan. And actually, that's what it says. He was going to go to Canaan. He never got to Canaan because he stopped up at Haran. But what we're going to look at right now is that there are three sons of Terah: Haran, Nahor, and Abram. Haran died before Terah left, but he left behind a son, Lot. Lot we encounter in the story of Abraham and Lot. Nahor joined a little bit later, and he had a son that was Bethuel. And two of his children are Laban and Rebekah, who also play a very important role in the stories that we have here. And here's Abraham, and Abraham has a wife, Sarah, and he has, well, I guess you'd call it a concubine, Hagar. From these two women, he does have descendants. Hagar, if you recall, was the slave girl that had been given by Sarah to Abraham to have children, and Ishmael was the result of that. And what we have are the Ishmaelites that are descendants of Ishmael. Abraham and Sarah have a son very late in life, and that's Isaac. You'll notice that Isaac marries Rebekah. Isaac marries the what? The daughter of his cousin. From Isaac and Rebekah, we get Jacob and Esau. These are two that we're going to spend quite a bit of time on immediately. From Jacob, we get all of these Israelites. From Jacob, we get all the Israelites from the two daughters of Laban. Now, we'll be coming back to these people often enough that you don't have to remember. What you want to remember is what's on the next slide. No, don't remember that. It turns out that in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, we actually, through the help of the priestly writer, do get the names of all of these different tribes, different people that were descended from Ishmael, that were descended from Ishmael and from Lot's daughters. It's an interesting slide. Spend time on it. What I'm going to do now is jump into a part of a review that is the last bit of material that we looked at last, actually it was winter. When did this all start? In March, right?
Yes.
We were looking at the story of Jacob. I don't know how far we got into the story of Jacob, but one of the things that I was working on at that time, and I will be getting into in the next week or so, is that the story of Jacob starts all the way back before Jacob was even born, and I can show you references to some things that are significant in terms of Jacob's descendants all the way into the New Testament. It's an interesting situation, the reason being that, there it is. We have to start with taking a look at the fact that Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, marries Rebekah. This came about because Isaac was about 40 years old and he was not yet married. His mother died, and Abram thought it's about time that this guy got married. And what he did was to send one of his servants all the way up to Padan Aram. Padan Aram is where Abraham had lived with Terah when they had left Ur of the Chaldees. It is way, way up north. You'll see a map in just a moment. And what was hoping that they would find a wife for him. This is Abraham sending this servant up there. Here is the Dead Sea. You see the Dead Sea? Here's the Sea of Galilee. Here's Palestine. Padan Aram is way up north. Actually, this is the distance of just about 500 miles. But this is the place where Terah had settled down with Abraham and with Lot and with Sarah when he left Ur of the Chaldees. He goes all the way up there, and all right, we have our stories now where this servant encounters Rebekah at a well. People are always meeting at a well. Why do they always meet at the well? That's where they give the water to the sheep. In Westerns, where do they meet? In the saloon. They go to drinking places. A couple of pictures of Rebekah being taken back and introduced to Isaac, and Isaac and Rebekah married. Now, at this time, Isaac is 40 years old. Rebekah does not have any children for another 20 years. Isaac is, it says, of 60 years old before she becomes pregnant. But when she becomes pregnant, it was something, I guess, to remember. It says, the children struggled together within her, and she said, it is thus, why do I live? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and the 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the other will serve the younger. That way. And what we have here is a picture. We have a picture of Rebecca during the pregnancy. She was having quite a time of it. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out forth red, all his body like hairy mantle. So they called his name Esau. Afterwards his brother came forth, and his hand had taken hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. Here's a picture of Isaac holding the firstborn, namely Esau. In the background, you see Jacob is about to be born. The name Jacob comes from the biblical story of Jacob's birth when he came out holding the heel of his brother Esau. This name comes either from the Hebrew root, meaning to follow or to be behind or to supplant, or it could actually mean the word heel itself. I found that rather interesting. In the Hebrew, the meaning of the word Esau is hairy, but it is also a word that stands for red, and red is a rather prominent color in terms of Esau. Here you can see a picture. If you look at these carefully, you can see this little baby does have red hair. They were fraternal twins. Now what does that mean? They were twins, but they were not identical. They came from 2 separate eggs. They're fraternal twins that are boys and girls. They're not identical. Jacob and Esau were not identical twins. As a matter of fact, they were very different in temperament. When they grew up, the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Here we have a picture of the family, and you see Esau sitting on Jacob's lap, Isaac's lap, and we have Jacob sitting on Rebekah's lap. This is a better picture. It shows the inclination of Esau to be a hunter with Isaac, and Rebekah and Jacob here doing household as a task. They were twins, but they definitely were not identical twins. There was a problem that existed, however, between these two, and that is the problem of the birthright. Esau was born earlier than Jacob, which meant that he had the birthright. Now, just what does that birthright really mean? I have a slide here. Well, I'll tell you what the birthright means. Birthright means that the eldest child, generally the eldest child, the one that is claiming to have the birthright, is going to inherit a greater portion of the material that belongs to the family. Actually, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says that he'll get twice the portion of his brothers and sisters. And he will also become the person that is with the birthright, become the head of the family and be responsible for all the decisions that are made concerning the family. Any decisions involving religion, any decisions involving marriage or anything of that sort. In other words, becomes the real head of the family. This is not unlike what we have in some of the royalty in the modern world today, because what happens is that the person that doesn't have the birthright does not have the authority that anybody else has, and very else other than the person with the birthright. Here is probably one of the most famous stories that we have in the Old Testament, namely that Esau really didn't care that much about that birthright. And we are told that he sold it for a mess of pottage to Jacob. Actually, what happens is that Esau comes back from hunting, and he's very tired and very hungry. Jacob had just made this lentil porridge, and Esau wants some. Jacob says, fine, you can have some, but sell me your birthright. And what it says that Esau disdained his birthright, and he sold it for a mess of pottage. I found more pictures of this sale of the birthright than you can imagine. That was not the whole story. Not only did the person with the birthright have to be the eldest, but he had to get the blessing from the father from whom he was going to get it. Isaac does not know that Jacob had purchased the birthright from Esau. Rebekah knows that Isaac doesn't know that, but she wants Jacob to get the blessing from Isaac. And so she conspires with Jacob to have him disguise himself, because at that time Isaac was very old and could not see too well. And here's one of the most famous pictures that you can find of Isaac giving the blessing to Jacob. And what is Rebekah doing? Keeping a lookout to make sure that Esau doesn't come back. And somehow or another, they managed to get through this. Esau finds out about it. He's irate, to say the very least. And he keeps asking Isaac, isn't there something you can do for me? And Isaac does give him a blessing. And gives him a blessing that he too will have a family and will become something of importance in time. Esau also found out from that blessing that there was a future for him, but he still was mad at what had happened, and he swore he was going to kill Jacob once his father had passed away. When the mourning was over for Isaac, he was going to kill Jacob. Rebekah finds out about this. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching, then I will kill my brother. But the words of Esau, her older brother, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, behold, your brother Esau comforts himself by planning to kill you. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice, arise, flee to Laban. Who's Laban? That's her brother, my brother in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury turns away. Until your brother's anger turns away, he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and fetch you from there. Why should I be reft of both of you in one day? Then Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the Hittite woman. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women such as these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? There's a description for Isaac and Rebekah's family. What's that? Dysfunctional in every sense of the word. Here is Rebekah telling Jacob, get out, leave as fast as you can. What we find is that Isaac called Jacob, and Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him, you shall not marry one of these Canaanite women. Arise, go to Padan-Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give blessings of Abraham to you and to your descendants with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings, which God gave to Abraham. In other words, Jacob does leave finally with the blessing from Isaac. Thus Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan-Aram to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah. Now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and said, well, this is where we find that he had left. We'll move on. Jacob left Beersheba. Beersheba was where they were living at that time, and went to Haran. And they came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place to sleep, and he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth to the top that it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Again, one of the more famous pictures. First of all, this is where this took place, in Bethel. You see this dot here. The upper dot here, that's Shechem. You'll see that later. This is Bethel. I found out something kind of interesting. I didn't realize that Bethel is more often than any other city in Genesis than Jerusalem, or in the Old Testament than Jerusalem. Very important city. Here are some pictures of the angels ascending and descending the ladder to heaven. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your descendants. And your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And by you and your descendants shall all the families of the earth bless themselves. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done that which I have spoken to you. What this story is telling, these verses are telling us that Jacob is also instructed by God that he will be taken care of and that he will actually receive the blessing. What Jacob does almost immediately is set up a stone. He sets up a stone, says that we're going to commemorate this place. And that stone pillar, tourists claim they can still see it today, the one that Jacob had set up. At any rate, what we do have now is that Jacob finishes the trip up to Haran. Like I said, this is almost 550 miles. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and he saw a well in the field, and lo, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of one of the wells, for out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds rolled away the stone of the mouth and watered the sheep and put the stone back in place of the well. Well, this is a good place to go. This is where people are going to come with their sheep. And sure enough, it isn't long before Rachel, one of the daughters of Laban, comes with her sheep to be watered. And what does Jacob do immediately? He falls in love with Rachel. As a matter of fact, when, then she sends information back to her brother Laban that there is a stranger here. And when Laban heard that the tidings of Jacob, her sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my kinsman, you should therefore serve me for nothing. Tell me, what shall your wages be? Well, he had these 2 daughters. There's the same picture, but colored up a little bit. He had these 2 daughters, and he bargained for these 2 daughters. He bargained to purchase Rachel, the one that he had fallen in love with. And Laban says, fine, you can purchase her by laboring for me for 7 years. Here are the 2 daughters. Here is Rachel, and here is Leah. After the 7 years were up, there's another picture of them. This tells us a little bit about the 2. One of the things that's characteristic about Leah that most people remember is that she had weak eyes. Moving on. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love that he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife that I may go to her, for my time is completed. So Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And they had a wedding feast, and Jacob has been married to his bride. He takes his bride to his tent. The next morning he wakes up and he finds out it wasn't Rachel, it was Leah that he had spent the whole night with. He had been tricked. There is a tendency for some people at this point to say, well, you had it coming, look what you did to your father. In other words, this deceiver was deceived. Jacob doesn't just let it go. He immediately gets to Laban and says, you've got to do something about this. And when Laban says, all right, you can have Rachel, but you will now work another 7 years. Now, at the time that Leah was married to Jacob, Laban gave to Leah Zilpah, who was a servant girl, and to be her maid. Rachel, when they were married 7 years later, was given Bilhah. That would be her maid. What we have here are 4 different women, because what happened is that Jacob had children with all of them. Here we have Leah. Now you want to look at this picture rather carefully. If you look at Leah, you find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 kids. We find that Rachel didn't have any children for a long time. Later on, Joseph comes. But these 2 servant girls do have children. Here is a cut down, here's a breakdown of the different ones. If you take a look at all of these down here, you realize these are the names of what? These are the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, except for Joseph, which later on becomes Ephraim and Manasseh. On the other hand, Gad and Asher are children from Zilpah. Bilhah gives Dan and Naphtali. All of a sudden what happened, no, it didn't happen all of a sudden, after about 14, 15, after about 20 years or so, Jacob finds himself with a rather sizable family, but he is still working for Laban. He is still working for Laban, and he realizes he should do something on his own. What he does is he approaches Laban with the situation. Well, let's look at it. Rachel finally bore Joseph. Joseph was born after all these other boys had been born. He said to Laban, send me away that I might go to my own country and make my own wealth. Give me my wives and my children whom I have served you, and let me go. You know the service which I have given you. But Laban said to him, if you allow me to say so, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I'll give it. In other words, Laban says, stay here. Tell me what you want to be paid, but don't leave, because I know I seem to be benefiting well by having Jacob around. Here is bargaining. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you and how your cattle have fared with me. And for you a little has come. For you had little before I came, and has increased abundantly. But the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. Now I shall go and provide for myself. He said, what shall I give you? Jacob said, you shall not give me anything, but you will do this for me. I will again feed your flocks and keep it. But let me pass through your flocks today, removing from it every speckled or spotted sheep and every black lamb that is spotted and is speckled among the goats, such as may be my wages. In other words, I'll take the ones that are, well, they're not quite perfect. They're the ones that are speckled. So my honesty, so my honesty will answer for me later. When you come to look at my wages with you, every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and among the lambs is found with me, it shall be counted as stolen. Look, this is a good deal. You can always pick out any lambs or goats that I have stolen because they wouldn't be spotted. If they're clear, they're stolen. I have only the spotted ones. And Laban said, good, it shall be as you have said. And on that day Laban removed all the he-goats that were striped and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, and Jacob fled the rest of the flock of Laban. Here we find them separating the speckled and spotted from the ones that are not. You see, they're being led away and separated. Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane and peeled white streaks in them, and exposing the white roots of the rods. And he set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks in the runnels. That is the place where they water the sheep, where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the rods, so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. Now that was an old wives' tale, that when an animal is conceived, whatever the mother is looking at, that animal is going to take on the characteristics. Or the person may take on the characteristics during conception. At any rate, Jacob separated the lambs and the faces of the flocks toward the stripe, separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the stripes, and all the black of the flock of Laban, and put his own droves apart, but he did not put them with Laban's flock. And what happened? And when the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob laid the rods, the runnels, before the eyes of the flock. They might breed also. But for the feeble of the flock, he did not lay them there. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. Thus the man grew exceedingly rich, and had large flocks, maidservants, servants, camels, and asses. Again, what we're finding is that Jacob is a very clever man, and finds a way that by setting up this deal with Laban to take only the spotted and the black and the striped, he could find a way to make them be the predominant ones and be the stronger, making him richer. There is going to be the time, however, when Jacob is going to decide that, hey, this is not the best way to be living, taking care of Laban's flocks and taking care of my own flocks. I've got too much of my own work to have to do. Let's leave. Let's go somewhere else. And they decide to leave Haran. And where are they going to go? Well, where could he possibly go? Well, one place he could possibly go would be back home. But what's back home? What name have we not mentioned once at all for the last few minutes? Esau. If he goes back home, he's going to have to come in contact with Esau. And he is aware of that, and he realizes that going back to where he had come from might not be the easiest of things to have to encounter at this time. But he and Rachel and Leah and the others consult with each other and say, yes, it is time to go. And so they pick up and they leave. Then the angel of the Lord came to him and Jacob. And he says, here, lift up your eyes and see, for all that I've Laban, you can read it. I am the God of Bethel. See, that name comes up again. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go forth from this land and return to the land of your birth. Here's a discussion of going back. Then Rachel and Leah answered him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has been using us for the money given for us. All the property which God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. Rachel and Leah seemed to quite willing to leave, because they said, after all, our father thought of us as nothing more as a means of purchase. He purchased time by selling his daughters. They said, we'll leave. We'll go along with you. Whatever you want to do, Jacob, we're all for it. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels, and he drove away all his cattle, all his livestock. He had gained the cattle of his possession, which he had acquired, and paid him Aram to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Now, interestingly enough, Isaac was still alive at this time. Here are some pictures of him getting up to leave. It was quite an entourage when you figured that he had 2 wives, 2 concubines, and at least 12 children. And off they go and head south, 500 miles south. Laban had gone to shear his sheep. Rachel stole all her father's household gods. And Jacob outwitted Laban the Aramean in that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the country of Gilead. Now, I want to look at this one a little careful. Laban doesn't know what's going on. He's unaware of this. What is happening also is that Rachel takes it upon herself to do something that she thinks is quite justified, and that is to steal all the household gods and take them along with her, with them. The reason I bring this up is, what are these people doing with household gods? Now, we're going to bring this up again later on when we get to the story of Gideon and some of the others. We find out, well, I could ask this question. Who were these people worshiping? Were they going to the synagogue every Saturday or the church on Sunday? They knew only of the fact that their grandfather or great-grandfather, Abraham, had a God. Isaac had a God. Jacob apparently has a God, but they don't know anything about that God. What they do know is that their household had idols. Why did they have idols? Well, we'll talk about that rather extensively later on. They had idols so that they could pray to the idols to make sure that what? That the rains would come and that they would have crops every year. They felt very strongly that they were praying to their gods to get the things they needed to be able to maintain their life. What happened here is that Rachel stole those idols. She figured that we need those. We deserve those. After all, look what our father had done in selling us to Jacob. So he fled, crossed the Euphrates. That meant he got out of the Mesopotamian area and set his face toward Gilead. Where's Gilead? Gilead is about 500 miles south. When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsmen with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. In other words, Laban's right behind Jacob for this whole 500 miles. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream one night and said to him, "Take heed that you say not a word to Jacob, either good or bad." In other words, Laban had been warned by the Lord. It says, don't do anything to Jacob. Leave Jacob alone. Laban listens, fortunately. And when he was told Jacob on the 3rd day that Jacob, this from that. And Laban undertook Jacob. Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen encamped on the hill country of Gilead. Now, here we have a picture of the Gilead country. Here's Palestine. See this little, here's Haran where they left. This is Padan Aram, way up here. This is 500 miles. Gilead country is right here on the other side of the Jordan River, a little bit north of the Dead Sea. Beersheba is down in this area over here. This is where they are now encamped. Here's another map that shows, well, I think we had that map before. This is the area where they are encamped. This is Ramoth Gilead. This is a map including cities very much later. This is a little bit more in line with the story that we have of Jacob. They're right near a river called the Jabbok River. Little above that is, I could say it yesterday, I'll get to that in a moment. Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you have cheated me and carried away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and cheat me, and did not tell me that I might have sent you away with mirth and with songs, and with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, Take heed that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad." But now that you have gone away, because you longed greatly for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? Jacob answered, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters away from me by force. Any one with whom you find gods shall not live." Jacob doesn't know about the fact that Rachel had stolen those gods, and he says, "It's perfectly fine. Go through the whole camp and find them. You find the person that stole the gods, that person will not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out that what I have is yours, and take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went to Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two maidservants, but he did not find them. Then he went to Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in a camel's saddle and sat upon them, and Laban felt all about the tent, but could not find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." So he searched but did not find the household gods. In other words, she was sitting on them. She had put them in that camel's back. This is the searching of the place. This is looking for those gods. And here's the picture of Rachel sitting on the camel's back, and the gods are in there, in the camel's back. Then Jacob became very angry and upbraided Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? Although you have felt through all my goods, and you have found of all your household gods, and you have found all of your household goods, set here before me my kinsmen, your kinsmen, that they may decide between me and you, between us. These 20 years I have been with you, and your ewes and your she-goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. That which was born by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. Of my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night." In other words, Jacob pleads his case that he has not done anything wrong. Thus it was by day that the heat consumed me, and by cold the night. These 20 years. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. In other words, Jacob puts it right to Laban. I have been blessed by God. If I had done wrong, I would not have been blessed. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But I can do this day to these my daughters and to their children whom they have borne. Now come, let us make a covenant, you and I. Let it be a witness between you and me." And Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." And they gathered stones and made a heap, and they sat by the heap. Laban called the place, I cannot pronounce this, but Jacob called it Gilead. There's a picture of them setting up the stone. Laban said, "The heap is a witness between you and me today." Therefore he named And the pillar Mizpah, he said, the Lord watched between you and me when we were absent one from each other. Have you wondered where that came from? If you ill-treat my daughters, or if you take wives beside my daughters, although no man is with us, remember, God is witness between you and me. Then later, okay. The heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and will not pass over this heap, this pillar to me, for harm. For the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judged between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. So Jacob offered a sacrifice to the mountain, and called his kinsmen to eat bread. And they ate bread and tarried all night on the mountain. There's Laban saying farewell to his grandchildren. Laban early in the morning rose, kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, and blessed them, and then he departed and returned home. And guess what? That was the end of that chapter as well. All of a sudden, everything is healed between Laban and Jacob. There could have been a lot of problems, but there were not a lot of problems. But Jacob now finds himself in an interesting situation of being way down in Gilead, only a few miles away from where? Only a few miles away from Beersheba, where Esau might be. He has to be concerned about that. There is a saying, out of sight, out of mind. You never saw anything of Esau up north. So Jacob must not have thought very much about the problem that he had with Esau until he came home. Jacob went on his way, and the angels, this is chapter 32 now. This is a little bit of some new stuff. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's army." So he called the name of the place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Whoops. That's not Beersheba. That's Seir. Before we leave that, he called this place Mahanaim. Mahanaim means booths. What had happened is that Jacob had set up booths to put all his sheep and his goats and everything else. And in a sense, he had settled a little bit at this place called Mahanaim. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's get back to this situation. He sent messengers before him to his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Well, let's take a look at that. He instructed them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. And I have oxen, asses, flocks, manservants, and maidservants, and I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you with 400 men with him." Where are we talking about? We're talking about this region right here. This is where Jacob had come with his family. This is where Laban had pursued him, all the way down into this area. Here is the Dead Sea. We're only looking at a few miles from the Dead Sea to this here. Here's Mahanaim, this little city here. This is where apparently Jacob had settled down for a while with his flocks. Succoth is not very far away from there, but it's still on the other side of the Jordan River. See the Jordan River here? This map doesn't show it, but there's another river going right through here called the Jabbok that's going through that area. But Esau, where's Esau? Esau's way down here. Esau comes all the way from the Seir. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two companies, thinking, if Esau comes to the one company and destroys it, then the company which is left will escape. Well, Jacob is getting ready for what might be a bad situation. Here is that meaning of that word, Mahanaim. It has something to do with booths. And I wonder what's a booth? Do you ever hear the word booth? We have booths. We have phone booths and podium booths. A booth is a very temporary structure. And the booths that were set up were temporary structures for the animals. And what we find is that later on in the history of the Israelites, they have a festival of booths, a festival that they hold around harvest time, where they get together and they build booths, which they live in, but they can only live in for a couple of days because they're not very well made. And that's the festival of booths. But let's move on. I'm sorry, folks. Somehow or another, things didn't get transferred right from the other slide. There are about 5 or 6 slides that I've included here that tell us where Seir was. Seir was a mountain south of the Dead Sea, not north of the Dead Sea, but south of the Dead Sea, a fairly sizable mountain. It was a mountain that was in the heart of a country called Edom. And what we find is that Esau had left Beersheba and had moved south. Rather than staying where he had grown up, he went south and settled in Edom. From there on in, we always associate Esau with Edom. And Esau became the head of a very mighty group of people, to say the least. I'd like to say a lot more about Edom at this time, but we'll just let it suffice for this. The people, the Edomites, were very talented people, and Esau's descendants were very talented people. I can justify this by pointing out something that I think most people here are quite familiar with, and that is that one of the greatest books that we have, not only in the Bible, but among the greatest books in literature, is the book of Job. And guess where it comes from? It comes from Edom. It is set in Edom. Job is apparently an Edomite, and the people that visit Job are Edomites. Esau's people did become great people. Let me just give you a little bit of a taste of what happens here. What happens is that Jacob is absolutely terrified at the fact that Esau is approaching with 400 men. That sounds like a sizable group that could cause a lot of problems. He makes sure that his people get across the river, get across the Jordan. Hopefully, they're divided into two groups. If Esau finds them, destroys one, maybe he won't destroy both of them. Jacob is making very careful plans to try to protect his family as well as he can. And he's left alone on this other side of the Jordan River, and he prays. And all of a sudden, we get a very interesting situation. A man comes up and starts wrestling with Jacob. And we'll talk about this man that wrestled with Jacob, because what do we know about him? It turns out he was an angel that wrestled with Jacob, an angel that was again going to give a blessing to Jacob, making certain that the reader of the book of Genesis realizes that God has chosen Jacob 3 times to be the leader of his people. Until next week,